I still haven't gotten rid of this fucking book, and every time I turn my camera on, it pisses me off. It's May 7 today. I am 5 months on tea, baby. If I look tired, that's because I am, and I'm aware. I think this is going to be a quick video because I read 5 books this month, most of them for my World Lit class. Good books, most of them. Let's just jump into that. The first thing that we read was this fucking brick of a book, Human Landscapes from My Country by Nazim Hikmet, who is a Turkish poet. He was in jail during World War II and he was writing like 50 lines a day or something, and he ended up with 500 pages worth of poetry. This book is pretty interesting. I mean, it's about Turkish history throughout the first half of the 20th century, which is interesting. However, it's written in prose, and undoubtedly in Turkish, it's probably a lot better than this translation is, so I can't really judge it on that. But it didn't feel necessary for it to be in verse. There was no rhyme or meter to it. There were just random line breaks that made it a bit clunky and weird, to me, at least. I do think that made it easier to read though, because if it had just been a novel, it would have been kind of a chore to read. But because there were all these line breaks, it was pretty easy to read. So I don't know if that's a complaint or approval. I did very much like the parts that took place on a train. It was like having a camera where you just like pan by every passenger and zoom in on them for a while and then focus on their story for a while and then move on to the next one and see the connection. And that was cool. I really liked the train parts, but there were some parts in between that which is kind of boring to me. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. Just a bit too big. Right, then I finished the other book about autism that I was reading, which was Autisme in het voorspellende brein by Peter van Meulen. It's a Dutch book, it's a Belgian author. I learned a lot about autism from this book, and not just about autism, but also about the way that normal people's brains supposedly work, because I realized that I don't understand that part of it. Like, at this point, I understand how an autistic brain works, but I don't understand how that's different from a neurotypical brain. This book was very good at explaining that. I do feel like it was targeted towards neurotypical people, and sometimes when it was giving examples, or like it always started with explaining how the normal brain works, as in like talking to you, your brain works like this, and then it would go to like the autistic brain, which was confusing to me, probably autistic reader. You know what I mean? I am you. You is me. And I don't have a neurotypical brain. That much I'm sure of. But it was very helpful. I learned a lot from this book. I'm not going to relay it all because I'm not an autism channel. Read it for yourself if you want to know more, but it was very good. Educational, and it was not full of propaganda. If you haven't seen my thoughts on unmasking autism, I don't know if you want to know them, to be honest, but they are in my March wrap up. Yeah, I didn't like that one very much because it was written by a furry. Aside from that, it also didn't feel as backed by science as this one did, because there was a lot of actual scientific testing and stuff going on in this book. I don't know how to explain it right now. Just trust me, it was a bit more I just trusted this guy's authority more than Dr. Furry Price's. So the next book that I read was Where Europe Begins by Yoko Tawada, who is a writer who moved from Japan to Germany in the 70s, 80s? 80s. She moved from Tokyo to Berlin in the 80s and learned a new language from scratch and started writing in that, and had a lot of interesting observations about learning a new language and seeing a new culture from the eyes of an outsider. Actually, this was pretty relatable to an autistic person, the way that she approached this German culture that was very strange for her. Meanwhile, lots of German people were thinking of her as a strange one. A lot of interesting observations in here, I will say that much. Also, her brain is a very interesting place. These stories, they're stories, by the way. I didn't say that, but these are stories. Most of them are weird as hell. So I love them, needless to say. I just want to read you this one part that I also read my mom, because I was with my mom when I was reading it, and I was like, hear this. And she was like, what the actual fuck are they making you read at that university? I annotated it with the word, bruh. I began to spin round and round. I felt drunk and sick to my stomach, as if after a wild celebration, but when I tried to vomit, nothing came up but laughter. It was so much fun, I couldn't help it. With every revolution, I became 1 year younger. There was no longer any front or back, and I couldn't see. My knees grew soft, my heels grew soft. I could no longer stand. My lips and anus grew hot. I was crying like an infant, the shrieks of a dying child being sucked into its mother's vagina. Howling, I vanished into the dark hole of the whirlwind. With the last of my strength, I cursed my mother. Death to the women with scales. Suddenly, my body was covered with scales, and I fell into my own vagina, the dark hole of the whirlwind. Great book. Very much would recommend Yoko Tawada's writing, because slay. The next one was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, which I've had for ages and for some reason never picked up before, but now I had to read it for school, so that's cool. Trevor Noah had a very interesting childhood, obviously, growing up in South Africa as a mixed child during apartheid. A lot going on, very interesting. It's kind of structured as stories, and I get why, because they were all like separate instances of his childhood, but I feel like they could have been structured chronologically, maybe, and they weren't, which was weird to me. But it wasn't as messy as Page Boy, so at least there's that. But it was slightly messy, but not. It wasn't really a problem. My overall thoughts on this book were very, very good. I learned so much from this book. Quite well written. I don't really love the tone of comedians most of the time, but it is what it is. He does have a way with words. My favorite thing about this book was everything that he said about his mother, who is an absolute star, a fucking legend. Every time he writes about her, you can tell how much love he has for that woman and how great she is, because she really is. This is probably the most interesting and important and eye-opening celebrity memoir that I've ever read. I haven't read that many, but still, I would very much recommend this one. The last one, I finished this yesterday, is The Autobiography of My Mother by Jamaica Kincaid. I was a bit confused about this one because it's called The Autobiography of My Mother, which first of all, isn't possible. But I did think it was nonfiction, but I actually don't think it is anymore. I'm actually pretty sure it isn't, because there was some magical realism in here, which I'm just remembering now, and they never got back to that, actually. There were just like 2 weird instances, and then that was it. She never mentioned them again. I thought this book was okay. One issue that I had was I didn't really feel like I had anything to hold on to. Setting wise and plot wise, it didn't really speak to me very much, if you know what I mean. There was some writing in here that was really good. Some of it was a little bit repetitive. Overall, there were a lot of interesting thoughts in it, especially about race, because the main character, who is both not the mother and the daughter of the mother that the autobiography is about. It could be interpreted in many ways, but she lives on Dominica. Her father was a Scottish man, and her mother was a native Caribbean woman. She never met her mother, though, because her mother died as she gave birth to her, which is like the opening line, and also something that she keeps repeating throughout the entire book, which is an interesting point, and it very much has everything to do with the progression of this woman's life. What was I saying? Yeah, lots of reflections on colonialism, race, identity surrounding that, identity surrounding not really fully knowing who your parents are. The question if you can ever really truly know who your parents are, whether they're alive or not. I think it might bump up my rating actually, because the thoughts in this book were pretty good. As I was reading them, I didn't feel like they were presented very well, but they were good. I'm excited to see what they have to say about this in class, because I can't really put my own thoughts into cohesive anything right now. So, as I mentioned, I'm tired. I don't have the energy to think right now. So, that's just not happening. That was all the books. This weekend, I went to the bookstore and I bought The Passion According to G.H. by Clarissa Spector, because I'm very excited to start reading more by her, and this is going to be my next one. I heard a woman eats a cockroach, and that's the entire plot of this book. I cannot wait to read it. Then, as for films, in my last video, I mentioned that I was going to see 2 films. later that week. The first one was Love Lies Bleeding, which was great. We love women with muscles. We love Kristen Stewart. We love lesbians also. So it was cool. The other one I mentioned was Four Daughters, and I said that it was Iranian movie, but it's not. It's a Tunisian movie. I was excited for that one, and I was very right to be excited for that one because it's one of the greatest things I have ever seen in my entire life. It's a documentary style film. Well, it is a documentary about a mother who used to have four daughters. We don't really know what happened, but two of them are not there. So this filmmaker has invited two actresses to play these other daughters as they like play out the events leading up to the other two's disappearance. Do you get what I'm saying? Anyway, in the beginning it was strange because it felt like very exploitative, and it felt like you didn't know where it was going. You didn't understand why they were making this film, and it felt very intense because these people were constantly very emotional, and the actors too, as a result of that, and even the filmmaker herself seemed quite involved in it all. Everybody got very much carried away with the emotions of having lost these two sisters. Also, the two remaining sisters were very, very young, so that gave it an extra layer of ethical questioning. But in the end, when you realized why they were doing this and what had actually happened to those sisters, it was the most mind boggling cinema experience I have ever had in my life. And everything about it was so intense. You know what? The thing is about documentary is it's like watching a movie with just the most incredible actors you've ever seen in your life because they're not acting. They're actually feeling certain things. Everything about it was so cool. It was so well done. Honestly, one of the coolest things I've seen in my life. I strongly recommend seeing that. After I walked out of that theater, I just had to sit on a bench and stare at the floor for a couple of minutes because my mind was blown. Such a good film. Wow. Strongly recommend. Another one I saw recently was Housekeeping for Beginners, which is a queer film from North Macedonia, which is very much not about, like, love. Well, it is about love, but it's about familial love more so than romantic love. And I love it when the queer experience is explored beyond that, delved into a little bit more. And I also love hearing from queer people around the world because we don't really get that very often. And this film was an excellent one in that regard. If you like queer world cinema, go see Housekeeping for Beginners. It was good. And that is all. I genuinely cannot think right now. So I'm just going to ask you to read Stonebridge Blues. I'm going to ask you what your favorite song on the Tortured Poets Department is. Mine is So High School. And also Badetti, I love him. And also Guilty as Sin. And also Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus. And also The Bolter. Yeah, that's been that. I will see you next time. Please leave me a comment. Bye.